All right, so we have up here on this one, we have factor completely. Now, if you know me, you know my first commandment. If I can type, new keyboard, first commandment is pull it. Now, when I look at 48 and 108, it may not be too apparent to y'all, but I'm pretty sure I can pull a 12. If I pull a 12, I'd have 4x to the second left over because, God love y'all. 12 times 4 is 48. And, here's what you do, kids. I know you can't do math. You play around with numbers. I just happen to be good at it. 108 divided by 12 is 9. So minus 9, because it was a negative. Now, I am familiar with this pattern, a squared minus b squared. Is equal to a minus b times a plus b. And I know there's a whole bunch of y'all out there, and this is really sad, but you don't know that the square root of 4 is 2, and you don't know that the square root of 9 is 3. That's the problem. So anyways, if I focus my attention on this, I know that a is 2, because a 2 squared is going to be 2x, and b is 3. And I'm just going to plug into my pattern. I already have a 12. Now I've decided a is 2, so 2x minus b minus 3, and then 2x plus 3, because I'm following the pattern right above here. All right, number 2 is a quadratic without the b term. You think about ax to the second plus bx plus c equals 0. And what you do is you either factor or you QF it. This does not have the b term. So x squared's on the left. Constant on the right. And we use the square root method. Now I'll have to write this out because it's not easy for me to pull up square root symbol on this thing. But that's the gist of it. And there's a reason I do what I do, because it worked in the past. So I'm going to take this 72 and I'm going to, give me just a second. I'm going to shift it to the right-hand side. That's going to make it negative. Now I'm going to counteract the squaring with a square root. And somewhere in that God-given brain of mine, I'm going to think about this being the imaginary root of 36 times 2. And the root of 36 is 6. So 6i root 2. Do not forget the plus or minus symbol. And that's done. Be right there. I got to knock at the door. Be right back. Let's see, where are we at? Number 3, you're supposed to factor. I wish I could make this easier on y'all. But you can't add, you can't subtract, you can't multiply, you can't divide. Probably going to struggle with factoring. Maybe I should teach the shortcut techniques. I don't know. I just don't believe in them. Oh, need the right thing. I use a guess and check technique because it's the only way you'll be able to teach your offspring how to do this. I know that a 5x times 2x is 10x squared. Now, I also know that 3 and 5 makes 15. And I might guess this wrong. I'm not thinking ahead right now, but I know 3 times 5 is 15, which is kind of a goal here. Now, based on how I wrote things out here, I would link these two together. I'd do 5 times 5x is 25x, and 3 times 2x is 6x. I want to put these things together so that I get that 19x in the middle, all right? It is a positive 19x. I need to take away 6 because 25 minus 6 is 19. If you don't know that, push buttons in a calculator. So this 3 has to be negative, and that 5 has to be positive. And I'm serious about that. If you can't add or subtract, that's not my issue. Push buttons in a calculator. That should have been fixed a long time ago. Factor 8 cubed minus 23b cubed. That is the pattern 8 cubed minus b cubed. And as it's rote memorization, factors is a minus b times a squared plus ab plus b squared. And again, this is something that we memorize. Not necessarily understand, memorize. So if I'm looking at this pattern that's up here, I should be able to pick out that a is 8 because a is something that's cubed, and b is not negative 23, it's 23. There's the 23 with cube, there you go. And I just plug into this stuff on the right-hand side. Everywhere I see an A, I'm going to be a 23, and an 8, and everywhere I see a B, I'm a 23. I'm not actually asking you to do any math here, I'm just asking you to get comfortable with the pattern. The truth is, on every one of these quizzes, you could probably make it 50-50 just by knowing the pattern of the signs. And the last one is to take b and square it. And that's the answer to this thing. I'm not looking for a number. I'm really not. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking that you can memorize and plug into a pattern. All right, solve this one, show the initial setup, and I'll type this one out because I can. We get to use the zero product property. The zero product property is pretty simple. It says if the if the product of two or more things is zero, then each individual factor might be zero. That's all it says. Might be zero. This one has three factors. X minus 5 might be 0. 2x plus 7 might be a 0. And 18x minus 1 might be a 0. Now, I don't teach 8th grade algebra where they do the plus 5 on both sides. I don't have it in me. I didn't sign up to teach that kind of math. I teach slide and divide because that's what I do. You know, the idea here is we move the 7 on over. It's not a hard concept. 2x must be negative 7. Then we divide by 2, and x must be negative 7 over 2. Notice I'm not pushing buttons in the calculator. I don't have to. Same thing on this one. Move the 1 on over, change the sign, divide by 18, 1/18. That's how hard that problem is. It's got 3 answers. 1, 2, 3. We have FOIL and show your work. It's not a hard concept. I'm saying the word here, FOIL. FOIL stands for first, outside, inside, last. This is just it's an acronym for double distributive property. That's all it is. Anyways, if I do the double distributive property, I take a 3 and a 5 and multiply them together. I take a 3 and a negative 7i and I multiply them together. I take a 2i and a 5 and I multiply them together. And I take a 2i and a negative 7i and I multiply them together. And then I actually do the math. If you don't know what 3 times 5 is, push them buttons. If you don't know what 3 times negative 7 is, push them buttons. If you don't know what 2i times 5 is, push buttons. And then we have on this last one, which is where you see most of your problems, 2 times negative 7 is negative 14, and you have I times I, which is I to the second power. Now, negative 14i to the second, you have been required to, although you haven't done it, you have been required to memorize that I squared is negative 1. So negative 14i squared is negative 14 times a negative 1, which is a positive 14. So I've got a 15. In the middle, I get negative 11i when I add, and then I have this plus 14, and then I put terms together, 29 minus 11i. Final answer. And the work that justifies your response. Moving forward in my life. Solve using the quadratic formula, always simplify. Hopefully you know the quadratic formula. Sing a little stupid song if you must. That's how I know it. Because x equals negative b plus or minus square root. b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. There we go. Now, I'm not trying to trick anybody. I put it in standard form. A is 4, B is -7, C is 7. Plug in and go. Opposite of a -7 would be a +7. If you're going to square a negative, as I keep saying repetitively, drop the negativity. Perhaps you listen to me. A is 4 and C is 7. And for those of you who get lost in computations, it's just math. I mean, nothing's stopping you from doing 7 squared. Oops. Nothing's stopping you from pulling up calculator, as much as I hate that you have to do this. 4 times 7 times 4. I missed a 4 there, didn't I? It's 4 times 4 times 7. That's what's inside. I just push buttons if I don't know. It's -63. X equals 7 plus or minus the root of a -63. And both pieces are sitting over an 8. Now, off to the side, I think about the negative root of 63. I know she's imaginary. I learned my multiplication tables in not ninth grade, 4th grade. 63 is 9 times 7. Root 9 is 3. 3i root 7. So my final answer here is 7/8 plus or minus 3i root 7 over an 8. And nothing reduces. You can't reduce 7 over 8. You can't reduce 3 over 8. So that one's done. Using synthetic division. A couple little things I noticed on what I've graded from the last basics quizzes is this. If x minus 2 is a factor b equals 0, then x is 2, because we shift over. There's a 2 out here. A large number of kids forgot placeholders. There's a gap between x to the 4th and x squared, so better put a 0 there. We have a 2, we have a 0, we have a -3, we have a -5, and we have a -4. So we keep only these coefficients, including that 0. The acronym you guys were taught was to drop, multiply, and add. DMA, we drop the 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 0 plus 4 is 4. 2 times 4 is 8. -3 and 8 makes 5. 2 times 5 is 10. -5 and 10 makes +5. 2 times 5 is 10. -6. The last number is a remainder, which is preceded by a constant, which is preceded by an x, which is preceded by x squared, which is preceded by x cubed, and that pattern goes on forever if there was more numbers. So here's my answer. I have 2x cubes, I have 4x squareds, I have 5x's, I have a 5, and then I have this remainder, so minus 6 pieces, and I said minus because it was negative, of x minus 2. That'll get you to a 16 on your next quiz. Determine the average rate of change for f of x equals -2 times 3/4 to the x minus 2 plus 3 over this interval. And this example is horrible. I would not make a quiz this bad, but this is just practice. Your average rate of change formula is f of b minus f of a over b minus a. And I want to point out, this is memorization. You cannot sit here and tell me that you don't understand when you won't memorize. You memorize. All you do in math is you memorize. There's very little conceptual, actually. Anyways, I get A and B from this guy. If I want to know what f of b is, I do that by plugging that 2 in. Feel free to play along with technology. I'm going to use it. If I want to know what f of a is, I plug in a -1. And I'm letting my x's become those values. Like I said, I'm going to use technology here. I'm going to use it quite heavily in this problem. So I need a -2. I'm going to store it to x. My equation was -2 times 3/4 with an exponent of x minus 2. Then I'm pretty sure it was plus 3. Yeah. So when I plug in negative 2 in, I get this funky looking decimal. Math, answer frac. Something seems wrong about that. That or I did it wrong this morning. Oh, because I'm an idiot. I wasn't supposed to use negative 2. I was supposed to use 2. There we go. Let's fix that. Take a 2, store it to x. Nice thing about the storage feature is you can just highlight previous stuff. Enter, enter. I got a 1. That's better. That's what I would have gotten in my head, because this morning when I worked it out on that hard copy I gave y'all, I got 1. So f of b turns out to be 1. Do the next one, I'm going to take a negative 1, store it to x. This is the one that's just bad. Highlight, enter, enter. Convert back to a fraction. Negative 47/27. So let's put everything into our formula. We found f of b to be 1. There's a minus there, so minus a negative 47/27. That's sitting pretty over b minus a, 2 minus 1. And, just do this in a calculator. Heck, do bits and pieces of it. You've got 1 minus that thing, which is 74/27. And the bottom's 2 minus a negative 1. I almost missed my negative symbol, which is 3. This ought to be 74/81st, but I'm pretty wiped out. What do I know? Seems like you're just going to triple the bottom. That's what I would do. 74/81st. Who'd have thunk? Done. All right, now you're at an 18 of 36 points. So you made a 50. Consider this sequence -3, -6, -9. Write a rule for the sequence. Now, when I'm doing part 1, I noticed that the difference is equal to -3. Because I know if I take away -3 from -3, I get -6 and so forth, okay? I also know a formula, and again, this is what I know, and this is what you have to memorize, that the nth term is the first term plus n minus 1 times d. First term comes from the text. It's -3. Turn on that brain of yours and just see that there's a -3. I don't know what n is because it's a general rule, but I know the difference is -3. What I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute -3. This one right here. I get a sub n equals -3 plus a -3n plus a 3, which is just 3n. So there's my rule. So that's what I'm going to write down for my rule. And I'm going to do more than just write an answer. Some of y'all think you can just write an answer. What have you been doing all year? I've never allowed you to do that. These guys cancel. -3n. Part 2 is a rough one. Part 2 requires you to know some things. Now, the truth is you could probably just figure out the next 3 terms and put them together, but whatever. It's a formula class. So do part 2, I need this formula. The sum of n things is n over 2 times first plus last. Now, it talks about the first term, which is obviously -3. The last term is going to take some work. It's the 6th term, all right? I got to find a sub 6. It's going to be -3 times 6 because n is 6, which is -18. How many things are there? It's 6, but n is always the high digit minus the low digit, add 1. It's 6. It's not 5, it's 6. So 6 over 2. Now, if you can't do this stuff, by all means, feel happy to just push buttons. The state expects you, though, to be able to do this kind of stuff in your head. 6 over 2 is 3. Negative 3 and negative 18 is negative 21. It's negative 63. That's what she is. Again, push buttons if you got to. 14 is the easiest one. What are the known factors? Only zeros are factors. So, not a 0, it's a 1. Not a 0, it's a 1. I have no idea how many times I've talked about this concept. I have no idea how many times that you've disappeared. This is a 0. It says x equals 5 is a 0 because we are taught function notation your freshman year. What happened is you probably graduated from Algebra 1 with a 60, which means you don't know anything. Anyways, x equals 5 is a 0. So if x equals 5, I do a little math by shifting, x minus 5 must be 0 because I shifted that to the left. And my answer is this guy right here. That's what I'm wanting. I have f of negative 1 being a 0. That says x equals negative 1. I do the same idea. I shift left. Then x plus 1. Another answer. I also have f of 4. It equals a 0. It says x equals 4. Then, therefore, x minus 4. You guys are taking stuff and making a mountain out of it. I've only graded 20 of the quizzes y'all took Friday when I wasn't here, and 12 of the people missed that at least. Easiest problem on the quiz. Easiest problem. All right. Now we're moving on to this one using a graph. You can answer parts 1 through 5, whatever. Real zeros and their multiplicity. Zeros are where you cross the x-axis. That's what they are. Like, they are the x values where you cross the x-axis. There's this little note off the side that talks about multiplicity. I mean, even somebody who's taught how to read using hooked on phonics can read, so read. I'm not knocking hooked on phonics. We're using it right now with my kid. I mean, they're just saying read. Anyways, we have a 0 right here. It's at negative 1. It is a touching, and if you can read, the multiplicity is 2. We have a 0 and 0, so x equals 0. And it's also a touch, so it's a 2. Again, most of y'all probably listening be muted. It's a touch. It's a touch. And the last 0 here is that x equals 2, and that's crossing. So the multiplicity is 1. All right, end behavior. This particular graph starts high and ends low. And end behavior is not a concept that we sit around and just moan about not understanding. It's a concept that we memorize. We memorize it. I bet I've given you 15 quizzes where you had to jot down end behavior. Shame on you. Shame, shame, shame. Anyways, this one starts high, ends low. Because of that, because I know my end behavior, it must be a negative x to the odd, because that's how every negative x to the odd behaves. You know, you guys are sitting here with TI-84s in front of you. You could literally go to y equals, and you could just type in some random stuff. Like, I don't know, x to the 4th. That's x to the even. High, high, guaranteed. High, high. X to the 3rd or 7th, whatever, that's odd. Should be low to high. Now, negative x to an odd number like 11 should be high to the low. That's how I know it, because I memorized these concepts a long time ago. Before you were even a twinkle in your daddy's eye, I memorized these things, and they still are true. All right, we have turning point theorem. I don't know how many times I've written this down out here, but TP theorem says you are at least x to the turning points plus 1. This particular graph has 1, 2, 3, 4 turning points. So we are x to the 4 plus 1, which is x to the 5th. All right, known factors go all the way back to part 1. So I'm looking up here and I'm going to change sign. I have x equals -1. That is the factor x plus 1. Its multiplicity was a 2. I raised it to the second power. That's a factor. I have x equals 0. You might think of that like x minus 0. It has a multiplicity of 2, so I square it. But you know, anything take away 0 is itself, so just x squared becomes the answer. And the last factor I have is I have x equals 2, which becomes x minus 2. Now it has a multiplicity of 1, so I don't need to worry about exponents on it. Factored form. We're going to write down y equals a, because everything starts with an a, x plus 1 squared, x squared, and then in a set of parentheses x minus 2. And I'm going to look at that point right there. Yeah, pile it, Toddy. Not that pile, the turn-in pile. That point right there gives me an x and a y. Thank you, Toddy. Everywhere I see a y, I'm an 8. If y'all can tell by the tone of my voice, I really don't want to do this right now. This is for the kids who probably aren't going to watch. It's for the kids who are probably going to mute. See you, Toddy.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And what I'm doing is I'm substituting in. That's all I did. No. If you don't know what this string of numbers is right here, God love you. You can go to a TI-84 and you can type this in. You can. You can type it in. God love you, but you can type it in. I think you get -4. And you do. See how much time was wasted? I'm probably being too sarcastic for this video's purpose. I just don't feel that I should have to do math at this level. Divide by a -4 and I get -2. So with that in mind, I have my actual equation. Y equals -2, x plus 1 squared. Actually, if I was doing this, I would write x squared first, followed by x minus 2, followed by x plus 1 squared. I know that throws some kids off, but order doesn't matter when you're multiplying, so that just looks better. It does. And that's that video. I hope you watched it. It was for you. It was for whoever was watching it.